the U.S. has sanctioned the UN Special Rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, a few days after the issuance of her latest report on the economy of Israel's genocide, which, by the way, very much covers a lot of the same information that I myself presented before the Gaza People's Tribunal a few months back.
Great.
We came to very similar conclusions. Her report was more in depth because of the nature of her mandate. It requires her to write and research reports, that are going to be like 30, 40, 50 pages. Whereas with the Gaza People's Tribunal, we were asked to prepare like a 5,000 word submission. But the gist is the same, folks. So the US has continued on its path of criminalizing the work of international lawyers that are using the law to achieve justice and applying it in good faith to some of the most heinous acts that we have ever seen. After that happened, a few days later, all three members of the Commission of Inquiry related to violations of international law in the OPT resigned. Like, this is the only other UN body that has a mandate to investigate violations of Israel in the OPT and wherever it may be. And they all resigned within like a couple of days of one another, which is funny because right now we're thinking they're afraid of US sanctions, like they're being put under pressure. There's some weird, like we don't know exactly what it is, but it's very suspicious, and it's never happened before in the history of the UN that all three members of one commission resigned. One of them was like, "Oh, it's my old age," and it's like the other two were like, "Yeah, me too." Like it was not real.
Yeah.
The Hague group met in parallel
what are your
to
thoughts
all
on
of
the Hague
this.
group? Are there any like actionable steps being
great.
taken? Because it seems like the
Absolutely.
major countries decided not to go ahead with like sanctions or cutting energy ties.
So what I understand is that 12 countries did announce sanctions on Israel, in particular to cut the flow of weapons that facilitate genocide and war crimes in Gaza. Those 12 countries include Bolivia, Cuba, Indonesia, Iraq, Libya, Malaysia, Namibia, Nicaragua, Oman, and South Africa. Obviously, you're right that there were many more states in attendance. I believe there was over 30 states in attendance from all corners of the globe. But those that decided to actually implement sanctions, I believe, were 12. But I absolutely support this initiative because I think it's really important for states to organize with one another to implement multilateral sanctions separate from the UN system, because we know that the US is going to block any sanctions which may result out of the UN Security Council, which is another way for sanctions to pass. And I think that bilateral sanctions are obviously less effective because we've seen bilateral sanctions take place from some countries. But when it's not organized and it's done, on a one-to-one basis, the impact is going to be much less. And so the fact that now you see states organizing with one another outside of spaces where the US hegemony can reign and they can sabotage and undercut any tangible action against this genocide, I think that's really meaningful. Unfortunately, it took a long time for them to organize and to finally see that something needed to be done outside of just issuing statements saying that Israel was committing genocide. So I think that's unfortunate that it took so long, but I think we should continue to watch what they do, and understand that when states act together, it's more difficult for the U.S. to punish all of them because the way the U.S. has been acting, it's been in a very retaliatory role against anyone who does anything.
U.S. is handing out sanctions like Oprah. You get sanctions. You get sanctions. Everybody gets sanctions.
Yeah, exactly.
But that said, I did see a report about how Brazil's energy exports to Israel have risen during the genocide. Turkey's still providing like gas to Israel. Many countries who were in attendance failed to take like major steps that would halt the economic activity. But there is good news from Greece, where dock workers held up and protested weapons shipments. Beautiful imagery coming out of there of the Greek dock workers on strike, unwilling to participate in the genocide. There have been numerous other actions like that as well.
Yeah, in June, you saw French dock workers refuse to load cargo of machine gun parts to Israel. Le Monde reported on that. So I think that's obviously a very effective way of impacting the reality on the ground. You know, if you're in a position to be able to stop the flow of weapons with your body, then stop the flow of weapons with your body. Refuse to load
Right.
the parts, interrupt, you know, the chain of supply to this never-ending genocidal assault. That being said, it's very clear right now that the way that people are being killed in Gaza today is primarily through starvation and killing at these so-called aid sites, which are really massacre sites run by the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the US and Israeli genocidal project to kill Palestinians who have been starved when they try to go procure food for their family. That is happening on a daily basis now. I believe today over 100 Palestinians were killed in incidents where they were trying to procure food and they were fired at by armed mercenaries of the GHF.
We
And
call
so
them
you see,
CIA.
as the genocide continues, that the means and methods of killing are evolving. So it may be less fighter jets today than it was a year ago because most of the destruction has already taken place. And right now, what Gaza needs is food. And it's crazy to me that there is not this worldwide pressure on Israel to allow trucks of aid into Gaza, and that we've sort of just settled into this new reality where we accept that there's a total siege. This is bewildering to me. I cannot accept this. And it's been months like this where, you know, we used to speak about this number of trucks went into Gaza, and now it seems like overnight we've just gotten accustomed to a new genocidal reality where there is no trucks that enter and people are quite literally starving to death. And the appeals coming out of Gaza are becoming so much more desperate about the lack of food. I know people who are feeding infants tea in their bottles because there's no formula. I mean, people are doing what they can to survive, but it won't, like, you can't survive in this way. And so obviously the number one thing that needs to be done to provide any sort of relief is to end this total siege, which is primarily how the genocide is taking place today. You know, you destroy a people in a lot of ways. You destroy their housing, you destroy their means and ability to procure food. You destroy their health care system. All of these are means for destruction. And at different times in the genocide, Israel has focused on, you know, taking out those various components of life. We're talking about Israel's energy deals, and there's a great article in Mondoweiss how Israel's energy diplomacy is fueling the Gaza genocide.
Yes.
That also references Francesca's latest report, From Economy of Occupation to Economy of Genocide, and speaks about the role of energy companies and how supplying Israel with coal, gas, oil, and fuel allows those companies to essentially contribute to the civilian infrastructures that Israel uses to entrench annexation and weaponize the destruction of Palestinian life. And this is the same infrastructure that services the Israeli military while it obliterates Gaza. And that even though this infrastructure may be civilian in nature, it does not exonerate companies of responsibility for its connection to crimes. It speaks about Colombia's coal embargo and how oil trade unions in Brazil are trying to pressure the government to end the export of oil to Israel, which consisted of 2.7 million barrels of crude oil in 2024 alone. So yeah, of course, it's very, I mean, all of it is connected, right? You know, their ability to procure the raw materials that they need to build the infrastructure to do all of this killing and to do all of this destruction so that then they can replace us, um, is essential. I mean, it's essential to understand that, and it's essential to target those companies and to try to get them to change their policies. So everyone should check that article if you have not yet seen it.
Also, citing Ghassan Kanafani, the Palestinian struggle is an anti-capitalist struggle, right? And it's a working class struggle. And so when working class people all over the world take up the Palestinian struggle, right, and they separate the weapons from their destination of being dropped on Palestinian tents, right, that is their contribution. That
Yeah.
is how individual people can disrupt this economy of genocide. And
Yeah.
everybody's like, oh, what can we do? What can we do? It's like, well, you can do things locally near you, right?
Yeah.
You can find out which ports are exporting weapons and cause a ruckus.
Meanwhile, the UK is arresting people day and night for their support for Palestine action. I think there was like dozens arrested today, and it's just, you know, it's just so embarrassing to see that
Yeah.
this is where things stand. Yeah, today, July 19th, more than 100 arrested across the UK at protests related to Palestine action. The Guardian reporting that you see these police just like corralling away these people with canes and like these young people that are saying like I oppose genocide. It's just so clearly on the wrong side of history. Like this is literally history being made and they don't even see it. Like they don't have enough um perspective or you know wherewithal to notice even how this is them being the bad guys. Like this is not a thing that history books will look back on and be like, and they were absolutely right to corral all these people carrying signs saying I oppose genocide. It's just so flagrant.
I'm reminded of when one of George Bush's handlers said something to the effect of, while you all are busy reading history, we're making it. He said, quote, we're an empire now, and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you're studying that reality judiciously, as you will, we'll act again, creating other new realities, which you can study too. And that's how things will sort out. We're history's actors, and you, all of you, will be left to just study what we do. And then he killed over 1 million people in Iraq. Mossad recently did an interview with 60 Minutes
He
where,
did.
yeah, yeah,
What?
it was it was actually not that recent. It was in December
Okay.
of last year. But it stuck with me because I remember
Oh,
there's a
they when they
guy
said we
who,
create a pretend world.
yes, he said, we create a pretend world. We are a global production company. We write the screenplay. We're the directors. We're the producers. We're the main actors. And the world is our stage, says a retired Mossad agent who was among those who was involved in the pager terrorism attack.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is I don't really think they're concerned about how history is going to view them when they're in charge of the levers of how history is written and portrayed.
Yeah, they may be in charge of what the history books say, but then people always take it upon themselves to to learn
Sure, there's the people's
outside.
history of the United
Yeah,
States, right?
exactly.
But
And
like,
then
how many
there's
people
the
have read that
yeah,
compared to their textbooks that were, influenced by
McGraw-Hill.
McGraw? Yeah, exactly. Like,
I
you know,
still remember the name of the
it's a McGraw deal that we've got out
premier
here.
propagandist that, we had to take tests about.
If you say anything about that on social media, you will be disappeared twice, 3 times
Well,
overall,
yeah,
including the Palestine pod account in 2021.
correct. And if you're not disappeared, people will say, well, that's a conspiracy theory, right?
Right.
What are you saying, right?
Feels
But
good,
it's
dude. Feels
what?
good to be here. Just the space of life that we're in. Being gaslit by everybody on all sides.
Look, all of that is true. But I think that just as many people in our generation ask questions, and we know that the public perception of Israel is very negative. Like all the polls show it. The policy remains what it is, but the public perception worldwide is very negative. I think people will continue
Yes.
to ask those same questions in upcoming generations, and they will continue to find the truth despite all of the efforts to hide it, that are going to be very organized and to rewrite this and to erase the genocide from our collective conscience. And that's why we talk about it. That's why that's why it's so important to continue to name the genocide. It's so important to continue to speak about it, because it's a direct means of combating these efforts to erase it. But like when you see the deletions of the evidence, on these public platforms, like it's an effort not only to delete the means of advocating and the means of educating, but it's also a direct effort to delete awareness of the event, like that the event itself has not happened.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ever think advocacy itself isn't enough, understand that it is very powerful, and that the reason why Francesca Albanese is sanctioned right now by the US is because she had a pen and wrote down a bunch of things that the architects of genocide did not like and do not want people to know. And I think I saw a really good tweet, which was by Nimr Sultani, who's another international law scholar, who said, if you really want to support Francesca, read her reports. Read every single report she's written, because all the evidence is contained in those reports.
Yeah. Did you see the New York war crimes and Writers Against the War in Gaza created a infographic of New York Times executives who have either lived in stolen houses, have served in the Israeli occupation army, or have children that have served in the occupation army, and they all have ties to, occupation activities. There was a corollary report that came out about Apple that shows exactly the same thing, that they have members of Unit 8200. And then I have been doing a little bit of digging on my own personal time since I had my Instagram deleted. And
Since
I've
now you
looked
have all this
into,
time.
yeah, so I have actually created a flowchart of Meta's connections to Israel. And
Wow.
it is bountiful. There are over 100 former IOF officers who are now working for Meta. And many of them, I looked on their social media profiles and confirmed that they were serving in the Unit 8200, the Cyber Intelligence Unit. That group is in charge of Hasbara. It's in charge of the global dragnet surveillance that exists against Palestinians. And it is responsible for like cybersecurity attacks on energy sectors in Iran, in the United States. And they also will blackmail queer Palestinians into spying on people, for Israel.
100 people, eh? That's a big flow chart.
Well, I didn't do all 100, but that's from a gray zone report.
Oh,
And I
okay.
did verify like 5 to 10 of them and included a few on the flowchart. Mostly the
Got
flowchart
it.
is like executives, but virtually everybody that I Googled from the Tel Aviv office was
Got it.
connected to Unit 8200.
Formally to the army. Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, Mohammed al-Kurd talks about this. Like, why is it just accepted as a default position for all of these individuals to have, you know, from the New York Times, to have connections to the IOF, when the same would never be allowed for any reporter in mainstream media, you know, for ties to any other foreign army, much less not formal army. This is your is this your
Can you
flow
see
chart?
this? Yeah, you can see it?
I
Okay, great.
do.
In addition to the reporting that's being done around the New York Times and also Apple, ever since I've had my Instagram account deleted, I've had a little bit of extra time. So I looked into Meta's connections to Israel. And it starts at the very top, right? You have Mark Zuckerberg, the chief executive officer at Meta, who's donated to Zionist organizations, has office space in Tel Aviv, and Meta's own internal review found discrimination against Palestinians. Right. Then we go to Guy Rosen, who is their chief information security officer. He is an Israeli citizen, a former IDF soldier, and former member of Unit 8200, the Israeli Cyber Intelligence Unit. Then we go slightly to the left to Adam Mosseri, who is the CEO of Instagram. He is also an Israeli citizen, has donations to Israeli orgs. And then we go a little bit more left to the Wicked Witch of the West Bank, Jordana Cutler, Meta's policy chief for Israel and the Jewish diaspora. She has Israeli citizenship, and these are some quotes from her. "I am living the Zionist dream." JNS 2025, April, right? Pretty recent. And also from a Le Monde article in 2024, inside the company, part of my job is to be a representative for the people of Israel. She's the former chief of staff at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. from 2013 to 2016, and the advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu's office from 2009 to 2013. So there's also over 100 Meta employees confirmed that were in the occupation army. This is a gray zone report from 2025, where Max Blumenthal looked into a deep dive of everybody who is a part of Meta's team, especially in the Israeli office. I only put a few because, you know, I looked at a few. They were all confirmed, Unit 8200. And so I added just a few. But I want to take your attention to their former employee, Shira Anderson, who up until April 2025 was their AI policy chief. She was a former lone soldier, right? And in a podcast in 2024, she said, "I absolutely do not think genocide is happening." Now, I mean, I don't want to sound cynical, right?
Right.
But it does feel that if virtually every single outlet where information is distributed and opinions are formed is, if not directly, then indirectly controlled by people who used to work for the Israeli government. Doesn't that make it difficult for people to make their minds up? Doesn't that make it difficult for the flow of information to get out about the genocide? Doesn't that in and of itself contribute to the infrastructure of a genocide wherein people can be decimated for 2 years and you can still have some people who are unsure? In a social media environment where one company clearly has a monopoly on thought, a monopoly on, the flow of information in the United States, one of the most powerful media companies, and you have people who literally represent the Israeli government. That's from their own mouth. Like, that's from the horse's mouth. I'm not saying she looks like a horse. That's not what I'm saying. She doesn't not, but she actually looks like if Walt Disney drew a Jew. Anyway, the point is, it feels like in the same way that you consume media that has like state-sponsored media at the bottom, it feels like all of these companies, corporations should have sponsored by Israel.
Yeah, like the way that like French football players on their jersey, it says Qatar Airways because
Yeah.
Qatar sponsors them.
Yeah. In the same way that NASCAR drivers have Budweiser on their trunk. Like, it should be, we should be
Right.
aware of what this media we're engaged in, like where it's all coming from and what they've done to infiltrate the levers of power.
So the NYT flowchart or whatever that was posted on social media showing ties to the IOF and to settlements came out around the same time that they had published that op-ed by Omar Bartov, the Israeli scholar, who finally, almost 2 years into a genocide, wrote, "I'm a genocide scholar. I know genocide when I see it," and did the groundbreaking thing of calling it a genocide. And I think he wanted some attention or accolade for that. I mean, it's inevitable, right? That as the movement grows, like there's going to be a lot of latecomers, including people, you know, um, like this, including the NYT that decides to run it so that they don't look biased, and that they look like there's some like level of dealing with things in good faith. But it's so insufficient. It's so insufficient. And at one point, even in the article, he said, "I waited as long as I could before naming this as a genocide," which, if you know anything about the legal obligations under the Genocide Convention, which you should by now if you've been listening to us, the point is to prevent it. It's not to name it well after it's over and when it becomes safe to do so. The point is to spot it in advance, to see that that's where things are headed, to stop it in its tracks. And he certainly, I mean, doesn't
He
get
said,
any.
he
Yeah.
said, I waited as long as I could. And we're like, we know.
Yeah, exactly.
We are not impressed.
No, we are not. Even the first Israeli genocide and Holocaust scholar to call it a textbook case of genocide was on October 13th, 2023. That was Ross Siegel. So, like, for him to be like, well, I'm an Israeli, like, now I'm saying it. It's like and Israeli already said it in October, like a week after, So I do think that it's interesting how these media outlets will try, every now and then to publish something that runs counter to the very obvious bias that's present in their daily reporting, so as to maintain this appearance of neutrality or acting in good faith.
Yeah. Whenever you have an Israeli who has confirmed Palestinian lived experience that they Palestinians voiced years before, and then the Israeli says it and expects it to carry more weight, that is replicating Jewish supremacy through scholarship, right?
Yes.
Where you're like, sure, there are a foundation of books that, you know, describe in detail Palestinians' lived experience written by Palestinians. They're dead now. You've stolen their home. But the books, you could stack them up and build a new house that they would steal, right? And so, yeah, but then this Israeli or this Jewish person comes along and thinks that like they're doing something remarkable and groundbreaking and expects for people to, immediately reward them for very little effort, for like the lowest possible effort,
Yeah.
basically. that is replicating Jewish supremacy, even in your so-called allyship. And that's
Oh.
something that I see quite often, especially with this discussion about like how Jews feel right now. Brother, I don't give a fuck how Jews feel right now. We are 2 years into this genocide. If you're somebody, and the New York Times just did this, who is centering Jewish feelings at a time of Palestinian Holocaust, you are insane. You are fully like, you're running cover for the genocide to continue. You are interfering with the genocide by like trying to manipulate people to think about the emotions of the genociders. Dog, nobody was interested in how the Nazis felt. Nobody gave a fuck about how the French were feeling in Algeria. Nobody asked how people living outside of Bantustans was feeling during South Africa. And nobody asked the plantation owners who enslaved people what their feelings were. And we are literally in a place where the New York Times is running puff pieces where they're like, do you feel unsafe as a plantation owner? And it's like, gang, when did we start prioritizing the feelings of the thief over the reality of the victim? How do the people who had their homes stolen feel? That's what I would be concerned about. I think they would probably feel upset and want to go back to their house, right? And I think the most Jewish thing that you could do is allow for that to happen.
I don't know if you saw this, but there was like a piece, and I don't remember where it was, that was talking about how the European Commission's coordinator on combating anti Semitism warned against new forms of anti Semitism, which she described as, quote, ambient anti Semitism, i.e., creating an atmosphere in which Jews feel uncomfortable, even in European institutions, noting, for instance, the bake sales for Gaza.
Terrifying.
Terrifying. So, like,
I
she's
mean,
suggesting that a Jewish person aware of a bake sale for Gaza is going to feel uncomfortable and that is going to be anti Semitism. I think we have lost an understanding that words have meaning and that you can't just change the meaning to whatever you feel like.
and it's
And
also like materially, Jews are not unsafe. Jews are the most safe that they've ever been, especially in the West, right? Like in the West, Jewish Zionists are so safe that if a thought triggers them, they can send that information to a government agency, a government contact that they have, and use state power to get that thought taken off the internet.
yeah,
You
or
have
have, for
groups,
example, the US Congress summon university presidents and do investigations into feelings at the
yeah.
same time that they are funding and arming the ongoing genocide. So beware of what the European Commission's coordinator on anti Semitism says is ambient anti Semitism. Ambient.
That's crazy. I'm gonna try that to go to sleep.
Yeah, ambient. It's like ambient's like a positive word, isn't it? Like ambient music.
Yeah.
Isn't it
They're
like
really
like
trying to steal
chill?
everything, including joy.
Oh, speaking of which, have you seen AOC's vote?
Oh yeah, AOCIA. We know about her.
Wait, that's hilarious. You've never said
Oh,
that before.
dude, that's what she's known as on
AOCI.
Twitter.
All but 6 out of the 435 voting members of the U.S. House of Representatives opposed Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment to strip $500 million in funding for Israel's missile defense systems, part of the U.S. Defense Appropriations Bill. Greene argued that the U.S. already gives Israel $3.8 billion annually and shouldn't be funding the weapons of a belligerent nuclear-armed state. There are only 5 other members who voted yes and supported cutting of the funding alongside Rep. Greene. Thomas Massey was one of them. Al Green, Democrat in Texas, Summer Lee, Democrat in Pennsylvania, Ilhan Omar, Democrat in Minnesota, and Rashida Tlaib, Democrat in Michigan. AOC voted no, of course, making her complicit in war crimes and crimes against humanity. And she actually ended up tweeting, obviously because people were like, what are you doing? You're so fake. She said, Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment does nothing to cut off offensive aid to Israel, nor end the flow of U.S. munitions being used in Gaza. Of course, I voted against it. What it does do is cut off defensive Iron Dome capacities while allowing the actual bombs killing Palestinians to continue. I have long stated that I do not believe that adding to the death count of innocent victims to this war is constructive to its end. I remain focused on cutting the flow of U.S. munitions that are being used to perpetuate the genocide in Gaza. Craig Mokhaiber came with a great response. You guys know that I am a big fan of everything that he says and does. And he said, respectfully, Representative, you have just voted to send weapons to a regime that the ICJ and all human rights organizations have affirmed is an apartheid regime that is on trial for genocide in the ICJ, and the leaders of which are indicted by the ICC for crimes against humanity. This is not acumen or discernment, it's complicity, and I think you know it. You had 6 people vote in favor of it, and everybody else voted against it.
Yeah. So AOC recently gave an interview where she said,
I would say that the United States, our responsibility is to the stability and the security of the region. That means being able to support, yes, Israel in its defensive capacities, right? In its ability, in that context.
guys, do you remember AOC? AOC? The one who was like, we're going to abolish ICE. Now she said, it's in our best interest to fund the Iron Dome.
I want to amplify a firsthand account coming from Gaza. There is an op-ed in Al Jazeera English by Ala Arafat, who's a teacher and writer, who wrote, "Starvation is killing my nieces and I cannot do anything to save them. Children are falling victim to Israel's starvation strategy aimed at destroying Gaza's younger generations." And in the article, she speaks about how her sister has a really big family and outlines in detail the struggle of trying to find these kids something to eat every single day. They have lost a tremendous amount of weight. One of the children is named Lana. She is 3 feet 7 inches tall, but weighs just 28 pounds. Her parents took her to a clinic and it was confirmed that she had severe malnutrition. She has been registered in a program for the distribution of nutritional supplements, but hasn't received anything yet because nothing is available. She can't stand for long periods or walk. And so think about what that means if they are suddenly forced to flee because of bombardment. All she wants to do is sleep and sit without being able to play with her brother. This is what starvation does in the late stages. You just sleep and sleep and sleep until you die. Alat wrote, "I cannot believe what has become of her. She used to be a red-cheeked girl full of energy who used to play with her siblings all the time." And Alat also outlines how, despite struggling to feed her family, her sister Sama refuses to allow her husband Muhammad to go to one of the so-called aid distribution points of the GHF because she knows this is a death trap. She would not want to have him risk his life for a parcel of food that he may not even be able to obtain. So please also read that article, read the firsthand accounts of people who are struggling so hard to get their stories out to the rest of the world, who have been physically weakened, who have been mentally tortured and psychologically tortured for almost 2 years now, but continue to write and to publish in the hopes that it will move people and that it will change their reality.